Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. We've got Elena on this afternoon. I don't know very much about her, but she's going to tell you exactly what she's up to. So over to you, Elena. Thank you.
Hi there. Well, what I'm talking about is Django podcasting. So I started doing a Django podcast about 6 months ago, but really this is a talk about disseminating news to the community. So what I will say is that this is a talk about a listening medium form of communication. This is specifically about podcasting and my process in doing this podcast so far, and that there are lots of other ways of communicating, such as blogs and through documentation, and this is just one way. So firstly, I will say that I have no special authority to be doing this. I haven't been blessed by anybody or put forward. I don't have any special audio engineering training, unfortunately. This is an idea I've had, and it's something I sat down and started doing, and this is my process to getting there. And the other thing is that this is something I do very much for me. I don't know if any of you have heard my podcast. I don't really make it for other people, but it just seems such a shame to do all that work and not publish it publicly. So this is a frame of mind I'm coming from, which is kind of a weird way to make a podcast, but nonetheless. For those of you who have read the abstract, you will know that I'm not the first person who has embarked on the good ship Django podcast. There has actually been a podcast around for pretty much all of Django's public history. I went and contacted I'm the fifth person. This is the fifth iteration of a Django podcast. I went and asked all those guys what the process was that they went through, and they kindly got back to me. So this is a brief history of the Django podcast so far. So the very first one was called This Week in Django, and was with Microtree, and he has a music degree in his background. But bear in mind, none of these guys have any formal audio engineering training. He was the closest by virtue of having done a music degree. And he ran for 2 years and did more than 50 episodes, and his podcast inspired me the very most. He had a very technical format. He got criticism for the technical format, but most people really liked his. But what happened is that he had a family and then just ran out of energy, and so it was taken over by Brian Rosner and Eric Florenzano, who Brian used to work with Michael on This Week in Django, and they had a lot of other contributors here. Like Alex Gaynor was involved with this project, as was Greg Newton did all of their graphics, and they had a pretty good run. They only took the technical parts. They took one technical part of the previous podcast, and they had a more conversational tone with tracking trunk. And then there was a bit of a gap. And I think what kind of happened was that Django just stabilised. There wasn't really a lot of things going on. So Microtree started at a time when magic removal had just happened, and there was not a lot of resources out there. There was just a bunch of blogs, really, and so he would kind of gather that all up and publish it. So by the time these guys worked around, it's all pretty stable. So these guys would talk about different. They would just pick a different topic, or they would have an interview subject and then have chats about it. And then they were followed by these guys who had their podcast sponsored by Lincoln Loop, and so that's Kenneth Love and Brandon Concour, and they had a really fun podcast. Actually, it went for it was quite long. It went for an hour or so, and they would have an interviewee, and they would prepare a bunch of bits of content that had happened in the recent history, and they would talk about. So they had all kinds of interviewees come in and talk about these things with them. So they had like Jacob Kaplan-Moss and Kenneth Wrights, as well as new developers as well, who weren't as high profile in the community. So that was really fun, but it came to a very abrupt halt at the end of last year, basically because Kenneth left Lincoln Loop to go and work on a different project. So this is where the curse came in. So if you can't read that, that is a post saying the curse of the Django podcast. Oh my gosh, what's happened? Another one has died. And so this is from 6 months ago. And this is kind of where this podcasting ordeal epic starts for me, or really seriously. So going back to the This Week in Django format, I started when I was starting to learn to use Django and learn to use Python to a fair extent in 2008. I started listening to this and was always a fan. And even though I didn't understand a lot of things he was saying in the more technical parts of the podcast, just by hearing him talking about it and using the language and pronouncing the terms correctly and talking about it in context, really had a big impact on me. And I always really liked the TWID format and was really sad when it was over. And the other thing I took away from this time is the week bit. Even back then, I vividly recall thinking that if I ever had a podcast, I would never publish it weekly because it just seemed like so much work. So his format was, he had all of these different sections, like I was saying, that there were random blog posts around about how you went and learnt and did things at the time, but no centralised place where you could find out what you needed to do. Everyone was kind of more or less working off the trunk, so he would go through and talk about everything major that hit trunk at that time. It's really, really useful. But for me, after my story starts with that guy. And what had happened was I joined Russ's user group because I moved into the locality last year, and I found going to the user group, I would ask Russ about something like, class-based views, like his talk yesterday, and just like an informal version of his talk yesterday, him talking for 5 or 10 minutes about his experience of this, like putting it into context that, we had this going on at the time, and so-and-so had done this, and this was going on, and this is how we made it work. And I learnt more from that 5-10 minutes than I learnt from evening after evening of reading documentation and reading source code. And what I really wanted was, like, the first time I had this conversation and had this sensation, I was like, oh my gosh, I've just learnt so much about how the core internals of Django work, that I wanted like some microphone just to drop from the sky to record it and put it out for everybody to hear. And not me do it, but like some kind of abstract like microphone kind of drop from the ceiling, and just to get the version of what people were thinking when they made stuff, because it's normally a rip-writer story, like you read, uploading or migrations or something, and it's really, really dry and boring, whereas it's this massively rocky, exciting trip to get to that point. So, based upon this, I sat down in the middle of November last year. So this time, Roundup is still going, and it's a really tops podcast. And you just have tons of project ideas. And I scribbled down my idea for my dream format podcast. Like, again, I was not going to do this because I don't have audio engineering skills. But this is the podcast I want to hear, taken a lot from This Week in Django, and with that idea in mind. And also, I really like the idea of having something like this around to make me do my home. Was part of the format was to go through and do people's homework on their behalf. So rather than, this is what I wanted out of a podcast, was that something just saved me from having to read through everything that had just happened. Like, I could just pop it in my headphones for like half an hour and just know and be up to speed. And I have a long tradition of doing other people's homework for them to my own detriment. Relatedly, I've also spent a lot of time on the inside of universities, and so I'm also of the academic frame of mind where we have all the time in the world to do whatever we want. But since I'd been involved with Django, I'd been involved with a couple of publishing projects, like a magazine and other content that came out weekly. And these people are crazy. Like, they have this deadline and they pump things out on a weekly basis, and I can't do that because I'm from this la-la land of academia where we have all the time in the world. But I wanted that. I still want that. And I'd been scanning around for projects where I could do that, where I would have an excuse to pump something out all at the same time. So all of this happened very quickly. Roundup was cancelled, and then suddenly it was right near Christmas. And at the same time, the Microtree Award was handed out. And Curtis was going to do the update email. He was one of the people I talked to about the idea of doing a podcast. Because obviously I didn't want it, and he has this fantastic radio voice, so it comes really. But he's not a person who likes the audio medium either, not like me being a crazy listening to podcast person. The other thing that happened was that it was Christmas, so I suddenly had a few days free. I was going to say with Curtis was that if he started on the 29th of doing the updates email on the 29th of December, I would start doing the podcast on the same date, and that way we'd kind of egg each other on to continue both on. The other thing was Christmas, I had a few days freed up, and also my PyCon US talk had been accepted, and I really needed to improve my speaking style because I'm prone to speaking really badly, and nothing will do that for you better than having to listen to your own voice a lot. But I was also very reserved about the decision because I knew about this curse and I wanted to have a podcast that would go on forever. So if I was going to commit to it, I was going to commit to it long term. So I went into this wide eyes open. And like the other thing is that you also, like normal people, don't really like the sound of my own voice. Like saying Kirst has a great voice, me on the other hand. But one of my other so I will say that the reason why you don't like the sound of your own voice is that you hear your voice through the bones in your jaw, not through airwaves. So when you hear it recorded, you're actually hearing a different voice to the voice that you hear in your head. And that's a really awkward thing to do. I knew this. I still don't like the sound of my own voice. I closed my eyes and I made the decision. I'm going to get over that and I'm just going to pump something out. One of my other friends gave me a really excellent compliment in that an English friend of mine actually said that all of the other podcasts were from Americans, and a lot of Americans tend to do them. And it's kind of nice to have an Australian accent reading out news because, the Australian accent's not that offensive and, that it's pretty passive, whereas an American accent, particularly the American radio voice, tends to be, it can be a little bit harsh to our old empirical ear. So another reason I do it that would make this easier for greater longevity is because I'm not creating any content. I'm just collecting it and spitting it back out. If it were content creation, it would be a different thing. It would be a lot more effort. And I first showed this to Russ. He's like, okay, so what you're doing is you're like getting the blog and you're reading it out loud. And I'm like, well, actually, yeah, but you know what? There's actually nothing wrong with that. There happens to be this format that exists that does exactly that. And the other thing was that I wanted it to be really kind of dry, like homework style, and not to editorialize too much. Even now when I editorialize when I'm recording and I just can't help myself. I'm like, yeah, and I think that that's a really good thing and isn't that awesome? But I edit all of that out because it's just not important. But I have found that all the radio shows that I love the very most are driven by the personality that delivers them. And so this is a balance for me. Like, I don't really know how to deal with that, but news anchors get switched out. So are you bound to their personality? I don't know. And the other thing is too that this is a point where because it's got that kind of newsy sort of format, it can, for longevity, trade out people. So right now, if somebody just wanted to do a section of my podcast, record it and edit it and give it to me, I would chuck it in without asking any questions because it's just about getting the work done. And I will mention too that the fun bit is the recording and the editing is really laborious. So I do get lots of people go, oh yeah, I'll help you record some. And I'm like, well, no, it's not the recording part that's hard, it's the editing part that's a pain. And another issue for me is about having fame and attention because I'm like an introvert, like I'm a nerd. I like having friends, but I don't really like being in this. Some people are like this, I'm not. And so this kind of makes it kind of challenging for me too. Like I was saying, I like it being out there, but I'm still not, this is something that I personally have to come to terms with. Because when people tell me that they listen to my podcast, I freak out and all I can think of is the mistakes I've made and all the sketchiness and my learning process with the editing, audio editing. So that's, these are things that we're learning. I'm saying I do it for me, not for other people, like for my own embetterment as a person. So tips for recording for radio is that I've picked up on my jaunt. Is that when you're recording for radio, what you need to do is you need to always be talking as if you're addressing one single person. So it's not like this. So I don't record my podcast like this. You need to do it so you'll find that all radio people do that. They are actually talking as if they're talking to one person. And you can also talk extremely slowly. So if you listen to the word count of people on radio, find out it's really, really slow. And moreover, you're less inclined to and ah when you're speaking slowly. Also, when you're talking to other people, you've got to be really careful not to talk on top of each other. And you also have to be really careful not to mash your words together. This is a problem that I have. I tend to run my sentences together and my words, so it makes it much harder for editing. This is the array, and this is the stuff that we really love, of condenser mics that all of the different podcasters used in the sordid history of Django. And I had an agonising process. So the first one I ever did, my personal podcasting experience so far has been like a trial of really sketchy microphones. Because it was Christmas, I got my parents to buy me like this kind of pretty crappy headset, and I recorded it on that initially. And I spent months making a decision. And I ended up picking this one. And I was really thrilled to hear later when I asked them all what equipment they use. Microtree happens to use exactly the same one as this, just by coincidence. And his is the format I like the very best. It's a cardioid condenser microphone. It's surprisingly heavy. And what that means is it records in a bubble around me, cardioid being heart-shaped. And the other thing too was I was told that with these microphones, the higher quality condenser microphones, if you record them in a figure of 8, they're really good at buffering sound perpendicular to them. So if you have a problematic background noise, you can just simply turn, like a fridge that won't stop making noise or a noisy window, you simply turn your microphone in figure 8 sideways to that, and you're less inclined to have dodgy background noise. I still have a problem with dodgy background noise. This is something I need to work to figure out. And to have a padded room of sorts, because I've done it very much on the fly and travelling, I still have a problem with this too. But recording in a car is really good, surprisingly, as a sound booth. And a main part of my podcast is recording interviews with all these guys, and it's been really easy for me with a Django podcast because something is usually topical. So the first interview I did was Amaric and with Andrew, and at that time the app reloading refactor was happening, so it was really obvious to talk to him. And what I did was I simply asked them, and I was really nervous because these people are like crazy high profile and their time is so precious, and I just sent them an email going, hey, do you mind if I ask if you talk to me about what your process was? Like, it's okay to talk to Russ because I know Russ, but like, you remember like Andrew, like he's terrifying. And they were great, but you know, I was really, really careful. Like, I really wanted to be really accommodating and considerate of their time, and I would send a list of questions in advance, and we'd negotiate the questions out, and then by the time we talked, like, all these guys did a lot of homework for their talks as well, like send a list, and I swear that they had written answers that they responded with. And so when we were recording it, like, it was just straight up, I asked them the questions, like, in a talking way, and they read it back, and when you listen to it, it really doesn't sound like that. So I'm like, I reckon that happens in the outside world more than you think, that it's all scripted and you don't even know it. So the way that we usually did record was over Skype or Hangouts is de rigueur these days. So in the ideal interview situation, if you're interviewing long distance with somebody, you get them to record it at their end with some recording technology, usually Audacity because it's cheap and free, or it's free and easy to use, I should say. I recorded at my end, and then I have a Skype recorder. Hangouts, it's harder to get recording. Skype quality is poorer, whereas Hangouts quality is higher, but recording on Hangouts is much harder. Also, I'm in the dumbest time zone in the world. I'm on West Australian time. So we're always negotiating time zones is a thing, but I still make a crazy hash of recording long distances. So I did an interview last week with Ola about Django Girls, and I made a complete hash of it. It's almost unlistenably bad, but it's kind of so nice to talk to them that I'm going to publish it anyway, probably tonight. Like, it's all done, I just have to muster the guts to push it up. So I use Audacity. Like I just said, I reckon it's a great example of an open source project, and these are all of the different technologies that all of the other guys are prone to using. I hope to level up to these as my experience increases. This is basically the audio editing procedure is doing that, and it takes about, it's a ratio of about 1 to 10. So for every minute, that's what one of my finished podcasts looks like. All my different sections, all my music stings. So Adrian Holivardi did a music sting for the original podcast, which he generously gave me permission to use, which he wrote and composed. I loved it then when Twid used it, and I love it now. I publish it on Soundcloud. The others had all dumped it down to MP3 or OGG and just put it up. I love Soundcloud, it's fine. So I didn't go back further than that because I missed a couple because I got too busy and I was at PyCon. Sorry. I do whatever it takes to get it out. I beg, bribe and cajole myself, chocolates and wine if I finish it. So it begs the question, will I make it? I want it to be just a thing that I do, and I want to involve more people. And I think that that's probably the magic bullet of making it last. And you know what, like just a couple of weeks ago, I was looking around to listen to a podcast because I listen to podcasts, and I realised what I was looking for was exactly the podcast I make. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's reassuring. I was like something a bit technical, not too fluffy, but not too long. And I was like, okay, well, that's reassuring. And the other thing is I'm still, like, it's only 6 months, and I still find it crazy, fun and compelling. So I'll release it, and I'll go through the big high, and then I'll go through the big low, and then you know, a week will pass and I'll start getting itchy to do it again. Like a week or two, I'll start gathering news, and I want to contact other people, and there are a big pile of interviews that I'd love to do still. And I just have to spend the time to be able to let other people into this process, which I'm, you know, looking forward to. And I mean, this talk is part of that process. But really, and involving other people in the process, I do think that this is a landscape where lots of communication needs to happen. I really believe, like, my podcast's really dry, it's about news, that Django Roundup could still be going, or something very much like it. And when I asked those guys for feedback as to what advice they would give me, and if they were to do it again, what they would do differently, they said that one thing they did say was that they would, you know, branch out into other things as well, like not necessarily Django, maybe other Python web development things. And, you know, other medium, like this is learning through audio. Happens to work for me. I like listening to lectures, but different people learn in all kinds of different ways. One of the biggest bits of feedback I get is that, is there a transcript? Because I don't want to listen to the whole thing. I just want those snippets of information. And the other thing is too, is it is about getting information out. So we like best that we understand best, and everyone understands things in a completely different way, and Django is notoriously bad at having its news distribution very fragmented and communication distribution. And just last week, the idea was proposed of breaking the core up so that problem of there kind of any sort of inner circle existing can be broken down. The people in the inner circle don't like it. The people outside that don't like it. And, you know, it's really watch this space. This is literally last week. They're talking about making different elements of the core team, not just one sort of homogeneous core that just does everything and everyone gets burnt out. We do need all these different things done in all different ways by all different people. So really, that's what it's about. It's about being involved in the community, because the more involved you are, the more likely you are to hang around, and we all get nice things. So these are the guys who definitely deserve their name on a slide, who have done the podcast before, and these are all my interviewees that I've had even just in this short time, and I'm so grateful. Every single person I've asked has just gone, yeah, sure. And the one thing that really struck me in the beginning, because I was still like super starstruck by these guys, was just how humble they are and how like generous and friendly. And, you know, I'd go, oh, you know, I'm kind of like, I always introduce it saying, oh, you know, I'm kind of really new to this, and I'm not very good, so just hold on and bear with me. And they're like, yeah, no worries, you know, I'll just try my best. And it's blown my mind. And I've already had all these people just volunteer to help me, so pretty lucky, that's what I can say, and I will try my best to keep making them. So thank you. Are there any questions?
Elena, what a wonderful, bubbly little talk. I had a quick look around there, and people were smiling the whole way around, so you can put wine in that, okay? It's good for wine.
There will be wine coming in this very soon, I
yes,
promise.
A great talk, and it's good to meet you guys too.
Timing. So is everybody...
That's the one for the slides.
Okay, I'm going to have to dump it out to PDF. Does anyone...
That doesn't matter. I don't think it matters at all, as long as they can do whatever they have to do. In that.
Oh yeah. Questions?
If you don't ask
Have we? Well, I reckon we could do 2 or 3 questions.
So what are your plans? Like, who would you want to see on in the next 6 months?
Oh, okay. Because I've got a really technical sort of drive. We're having this kind of bit of an argy-bargy around the settings.py. And the next 2 episodes are absolutely going to be dedicated to Django 1.7. And I've got all this stuff loaded up, like Curtis and another guy, Adam, are helping me with that. Like, I'm going to be terrorizing the release management team as I do. I nag and harass. Like, I feel really naggy, but I'm like, hey, what's happening, so I can, put news out. So all kinds of things. So that's like in my dream version, I want to have a schedule of what's coming up in the coming months. So it's kind of on a month-to-month basis, and then listing my plans for who I hope to be featuring, interviewing for that particular release.
For anyone who's been watching, obviously my Django update posts have kind of died recently, and I sort of lost some momentum on them. However, I was thinking from what you were saying in your talk, perhaps we should really synchronise the release of your podcasts with the release of the Django updates and share all the content with them. I was going to say, are you happy with that? But I can already see...
Big five, yes, please.
With that. So, okay.
Yes.
This has been publicly committing to it.
Yes. And if anyone else wants to be part of this, or you know anyone else who does, please, just, you know where you can find us. You can find him on IRC.